I've never really considered myself a game designer, even though I'm very grateful that, for example, my game Parabox won this IGF in Design Award, or Excellence in Design Award. I've always loved making games. I consider myself like a crafts person, and mainly I consider myself a programmer. I have gotten a lot of value over making lots of small games, and I've got more so than I would have gotten out of putting the equivalent time and effort into making the equivalent number of big games. Although it's hard to say because I've only lived one life. I haven't lived my life both ways. Knowing what is most important to be done is also a skill I've developed over making, dozens and dozens of games before. So it's helpful to apply that. Like, oh, we need to do this in order for the game to be functional. Even though we really want to do this other thing that's it improves the aesthetics a lot, it's like maybe we should do the first thing first in terms of order of operations about what do we get the most iteration time on.
Okay, maybe we can start with who you are and actually where are you from and how did you get into game development?
Okay, hi, I am Patrick. I am a game developer. I have been making games since I was in high school, approximately, about midway through high school. I have recently been making lots of puzzle games, but before that, I've made lots of platformer games and lots of miscellaneous other games, like doing lots of game jams and stuff. This game called I Want to Be the Guy, which is a freeware platformer, which I believe was released around 2009. It's like one of the first quote-unquote rage games. It's like a really rage platformer with lots of traps that are designed to be funny, but also frustrating. And it turns out there's a whole sub-community based around making fan games of this game, some of which lean into the traps, but some of which lean into the precision platforming aspect and other aspects, like bullet hell, putting bullet hell in the mix. And I made games in that community for many years. And that's where I really got my, before I did puzzle games, that was the other major chapter in my game development life, is making these I Want to Be the Guy fan games.
This was like with an editor, or how did you do it?
The majority of these games are made in GameMaker, and there is like a few base project files that people pass around that have the basic, yeah. And so it has all the kind of base graphics from I Want to Be the Guy, has the player physics, has like the saving and loading code, has a bunch of example objects like, here's how you do a moving object in a common pattern. Here's the spike, And that was actually very nice to me because I don't have to start from scratch when making a game. I don't have to open GameMaker to an empty project file. I can play the game and run through the example rooms, and then I can very clearly see, oh, I can edit this room to make it my own, or I can add my own graphics here, and oh, I can see the code for how this and this and this works. Here's how I'd make this object. And that, similar to, I didn't get my start modding games, but this to me feels it's a very similar spirit to modding a game, where there's just so much example code and everything to look at. So that was I didn't realize it at the time, but I think that was a big benefit of this community.
Where the name comes from? I Want to Be the Guy.
Well, so I Want to Be the Guy was made by a developer called Kayan, and he has said, I'm not sure exactly where the name came from. He said it might have been an in-joke from the friend, or maybe it was from Homestar Runner. So it's unknown, okay. I think.
Okay. How did you move from modding, like adapting the projects into making new games from GameMaker to other games?
I've done a lot of game jams, and I did some of those game jams in GameMaker. Like, hey, I know GameMaker. Why don't I start with the blank project file this time to do this game jam? But also simultaneously, I was branching out to different tools. Like I've also used at that time Construct Classic, which is, if you know the Construct game engine, it's like this visual scripting language that I quite like. So I branched out a little bit into that. I branched out a little bit into this Flash library called Flashpunk, and which is it's very similar to the Flixel game library. These are a bunch of pixel art Flash games were made using these two libraries. They're not super complicated, I could, from a strong GameMaker background, could branch out into those tools and did a lot of game jams in them.
If you would like to support this channel, you can become a member on Patreon. You will be granted access to a private Discord channel where you can chat with other supporters and guests of this show. For more details, check out my website at wooka.sh. Wookash. Was it more that do you consider yourself now more of a game developer or like game designer? Like what would be your like core thing, you know?
I was actually hoping to touch on this. Definitely game developer. I've never really considered myself a game designer, even though I'm very grateful that, for example, my game Parabox won this IGF in Design Award, or Excellence in Design Award. I've always loved making games. I consider myself like a crafts person, and mainly I consider myself a programmer. Although I love, being the person who gets to design the game and be like, oh, what if we had a game about this? And, oh, what if this mechanic worked this way? I could program that. No one can stop me. No one can veto me. I can do it. And I get to see what happens. And so definitely a game developer. That even though I love programming and I also love like pure design, like I've made a few board games at game jams, I love the process in making an interactive system. Sometimes a puzzly system, but yeah, I consider myself a game developer for sure.
So when you're switching from like a game maker to these other tools, like it's not about like searching for something that would help you with like, how do I want to say this? Like if you have a big engine, there is a lot of things to take care of, and there are these smaller libraries that allow you to make games faster, but you don't need to care that much about like underlying code, or like there is pre-made assets for you to make your game with. You want to do all of that, like both the programming, code, but also art, design, like all of that.
I think it depends on what I want to do. I think usually I do like to do all of it because I have fun drawing the graphics and I have fun picking the colors. I enjoy that. I don't necessarily have fun picking all the sound effects, or let alone designing all the sound effects. I'm really not a sound designer or a musician for that matter. At least I don't have a lot of experience with that. I would say it depends. As we said, I just got started with these I Want to Be the Guy fan games, and I loved the fact that I didn't know how to code these block collisions with this very precise pixel perfect collision handling edge cases. That was just a black box to me, but I could make the rest of the game. I could code a spring object that springs you high up, and I didn't have to code the block collisions. But nowadays, I want to code the block collisions. I don't want any code done for me. It also depends. Like sometimes I use PuzzleScript, and PuzzleScript, if you don't know, if you can visit puzzlescript.net, and it's this tool for making Sokoban games, and it has sort of a custom constraint-based, or not constraint-based, but substitution-based logic system. So it's not quite procedural code, but similar. But it's a very heavy set of constraints. You can only make Sokoban games and only with pixel art. But those specific constraints PuzzleScript has, they're really good, and the tools it has, it's really nice for making that kind of game. Like, definitely recommend if you're interested in Sokoban games but haven't checked out PuzzleScript. So sometimes I'm in the mood for that, and sometimes it's a great for game jams. And so I think I enjoy having all these tools at my disposal. Thinking of myself as an artist, like, oh, what tool do I have to make this project? Yeah, I don't know. I enjoy having a lot of tools in the workshop, so to speak.
Yeah. And you made a lot of prototypes, and game jams. What do you get from that? Some people, they would be like, I want to make my dream game, and they will spend like 10 years on working on the same project. And you made a lot of like quick, short prototypes. What do you think you got from that?
Yeah, I think everyone has different goals in their life, but also in regards to specifically game development. And I always just loved making games. Somehow I was bitten by this game development bug, and then I love making games. But it started with I played lots of games as a kid and stuff. So it also depends on how you categorize these things. Like most of the games I've made, I wouldn't categorize them as prototype, because if I made them at a game jam, I would say it's a game jam game, and it's finished, and I got someone to play it and fix the major problems before I released it and things like that. So, but I have made a lot of prototypes that I have not released. So maybe I would consider a prototype something I haven't released. Anyways, it's a very nebulous line. But I've also made some sizable, like, big projects too. Many of them in the I Want to Be the Guy fan game community. I've made some very big projects there. So I've also noticed that over time, my opinion changes. Like, I think I want to work on slightly bigger projects now versus 10 years ago. So there's all these facets to the question you asked. And I think also, of course, everyone has a different balance. Like I said, everyone has their own goals. And so all that to say, to synthesize these, I think I have gotten a lot of value over making lots of small games. And I've got more so than I would have gotten out of putting the equivalent time and effort into making the equivalent number of big games. Although it's hard to say because I've only lived one life. I haven't lived my life both ways. I'm a big proponent. I watched some of the episode of where you talked with Tyler Glale on this podcast, and what he said at the end of that episode about recommending people to make lots of games. I'm 100% on the same page. And for me, a really informative quote, a really influential quote, or I heard this is a common refrain, but I've heard it first from Derek Yu, the game developer.
Spelunky.
Spelunky and many other games. UFO 50 now is released with that team. I love that game. Derek has this blog post that says something like treat finishing a game as a distinct skill. And so I could be really good at individual parts of a game, but there is something about tying it all together and doing all the little bits and pieces that I don't want to do, and like solving big conceptual problems like, oh crap, this thing doesn't actually work how I imagined it, or like I didn't imagine that I needed so many sound effects. Whoa. Or like things like that are the kind of things I realized, like I want to improve at the holistic process. And so treating finishing a game as its own skill is something I can practice by doing lots and lots of small games. I think another factor is that I have lots and lots of ideas. I have tons and tons of ideas. Nowadays, I have tons and tons of Sokoban ideas, for example. And like, I want to make a large quantity of those. I want to make, I'm not even making maybe half of the ideas I have, but like, I want to, I want to make them. So that's my rant on that. Do you have anything you want to latch onto with that?
Yes, I have. Let's do one tangent on Sokoban games. I felt like this genre is like solved. Like there is nothing else to be added there. And you were saying that you have tons of ideas, and like in general, Jonathan Blow and people at Thekla, including you, are making this like massive game with Sokoban. It's like, how is it like? How in this very tight and constrained world of Sokoban games, where you like one guy pushing things, usually like a rock to a hole, can be so much complexity?
I think maybe I also got bitten by the Sokoban bug, so I just love Sokoban games in the same way. But there is something about this mathematical complexity that I feel like something about the rule set you just described just gives way to lots of... There's just so much you could do with it. And I think it's still fertile ground. And maybe some people aren't as interested in that, and that's fine. But I love it. Like for example, if we look at like the game like Parabox, those mechanics, it's like Sokoban, but there's each box is another little level with other boxes and stuff. And you can switch between the layers at the edges. There's nothing specific to that idea that required it to be made in the last few years. It could have been made 15 years ago, for example, assuming you could get the rendering sort of to work and stuff like that. And to the fact that we didn't have a big version of that game within the last, it just shows me, wow, there must be more here. If I could find this awesome rule set I discovered relating to Sokoban, there must be more here to discover. Like, that's my feeling. And also games like Baba Is You, or there's just tons and tons of Sokoban games. Or like a Monsters Expedition. There's just so many Sokoban games, and we haven't solved Sokoban yet. I will say we haven't pushed all the rocks into all the holes. I think there's a lot of holes and a lot of rocks.
Okay. Let's come back.
That's
Let's come back to some of your games or prototypes that you'd like to shout out. One of the like before we move into the bigger ones, like are there some earlier, older, meaning older, games or prototypes that you'd like to talk about?
yeah. I think there's a lot. I think hmm, yeah, which ones? I would love to talk about. Okay, I need to take a moment to decide here.
No rush.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. 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 Okay. I've picked one. So there's this game which it's probably best viewed on YouTube called. It's an I Want to Be the Guy fan game that I made. I don't even remember what year it was. But it's called I Want to Try a Collab, which is a weird name, but all the I Want to Be the Guy fan games for the most part follow this I wanna something something. So we had this idea. Well, I had this idea to do sort of an exquisite corpse development of the fan games. And what exquisite corpse is this creative exercise where imagine you have a big sheet of paper and then someone draws the head of this body, and then the next person draws the torso, and the next person draws an arm, next person draws a leg, and you end up with this bizarre conglomeration of this weird corpse. But it's a fun creative exercise to work with what other people are doing and to see this result that is unexpected. And it's just a really great creative exercise. And so I've never done this in a drawing, but I've done this the equivalent in game form. And there's this game called Experiment 12 a while ago that a bunch of indie developers, about 12 of them, I think exactly 12, did this thing where each person makes a game, and then the next person makes the game that's sort of a continuation story-wise, and the next person makes the game that's continuation. But these games have totally different game mechanics and graphics and styles, but they have this connecting through line, and you're riffing off of what people are doing. Anyway, so I didn't participate in that, but this game, I Want to Try a Collab. What we did was, hey, let's make a screen of platforming, precision platforming. And here's how it's going to work. We're going to have 4 people, and we're going to end up with 4 screens of platforming. First, everyone is going to pick a piece of music that they love online. And we're not worrying about copyright or piracy here. We're just kind of stealing our favorite musics. Because these games are freeware, I guess. Then everyone's picked their music. Then you switch and give the music to the next person, and then they have to develop graphics, whatever graphics are going to be used for this screen, based on the music. So fit the vibe. And sometimes someone gives you a really silly music, and it's like, oh my god, what do you expect me to make for this meme song? But sometimes it's a serious song, and like people make graphics you don't expect. The third person programs, then you hand it off to the next person. The third person, given the music and graphics, you design the mechanics and program the mechanics. Like, oh, they drew an object that looks like it could be used as a trap, or they drew an object that looks like it could be used as a puzzle element, or this could be a platforming gimmick where it shifts every time you jump. And so I'm going to program that. And you program a bunch of mechanics, or however much you have time for. And then you shift off to the final person, and they have to do a level design. Given these mechanics and trying to utilize all the graphical flourishes and backgrounds people have made, put it all together and make a level. And sometimes the levels turn out like, oh my god, what do you expect me to do with this gimmick that just explodes the whole screen when you touch it or whatever? It's like, what do you expect? We can just make a meme screen. But sometimes it's really interesting. Like, oh, I made a sine wave particle object that you have to dodge things as they go into sine wave. And then you could turn on and off the sine wave. And, that one in particular ended up really cool and unexpected. So then we ended up with these 4 screens, and then we all play them together and look how we did, and it's a creative exercise. And by the way, each of these phases, we only have 1 hour time limit. So it's like quite fast paced. And sometimes we ended up going over the time limit, and it's like, oh, come on, Patrick, hurry up. We're all finished. We all submitted. Hurry up. So sometimes it took longer than that. Okay, so now we have the 4 screens. Now we put this game, I Want to Try a Collab. We did this like, I forget exactly how many times, but over 20 times we did this over the course of some months, just as fun creative exercises.
Okay.
But with the idea that let's just put all the results into a game. So this game, I really wish I had the exact number of screens, but it has four. It has. Gotta look up the exact number. I'm not trying. Okay, there are 90 total screens in this game because sometimes we did a format where we have 5 instead of 4 or 6 instead of 4.
Okay.
And so some of these screens end up being terrible, and so we sort of organized the game. Let's just go from the most terrible, and then you gradually progress, and then you get to the best ones at the very end. And we sort of and then you don't have to solve every level as you go. Within each group there's like a very much leniency which ones you solve. And we did sort of space them out, like, hey, if we made this time we made video game like bosses, we'll spread out the bosses, so sometimes there's bosses in different places. So anyways, this is a really complicated format that I've just explained, but I just wanted to bring this one game up specifically because it's sort of like a bunch of mini game jams, but then there's also this like, let's really try to package this into a holistic product and celebrate creativity and silliness and but also seriousness, and just see all the. I just love this game because it was. I hope it highlights that I get a lot out of doing these, and it's a blast to see what people come up with. Like, how did you use my graphics, or all I put in was the music, and then look what that spawned from it. And this game to me is I don't know. It's a little bit emblematic, I think, of why I like making games, and I'm really happy that we could all. I wasn't the only one who put this project together. There were other people who helped, and then also, especially, we made I want to try Collab 2, which has even more. Imagine double the content. I wasn't the main one who worked on that, but anyways, I wanted to bring that up as emblematic of. I really get a lot out of these creative exercises and having a great time and making memories with my game development peers while we are being very creative and honing our skills. And I think I got a lot of level design skills that very much transferred over to puzzle games from just making tons and tons of these platforming screens. And anyways, all that to say, you can look up a YouTube video of I want to try a collab, and I want to try Collab 2 if you want to see what I'm talking about.
I was about to ask, is it available somewhere? So you say that's only yes. Video in a video format.
Oh, no, you can very much download the games.
Oh.
I just warn you that they're hard because they are in this community that plays these very difficult platformers. But if you're into platformers, you might enjoy them. Just be warned, some of them are kind of jank. And in the second one, there's this area called Mr. Bones' Wild Ride that contains all of the most memey levels. So beware if you ever get on Mr. Bones' Wild Ride.
Okay, this was unexpected. 4 people doing this, like passing the prototype that is getting more and more into a game, and then trying to put this all into one cohesive thing. This must have been a mess, Like...
Yeah, it didn't end up quite cohesive. It's sort of like, hey, look at all the variety we have. But it is cohesive in that we had to fix all the bugs. We had to make sure the graphics are all consistent, things like that, So it's cohesive, and it was technically cohesive,
Nice. Are there any other prototypes or game jam games or some older work? Because that's, if I was expecting you to say like, oh, I made this platformer, I like the level design, and like this is like way beyond what I imagined that was happening in the prototype world. So if we can talk about some of the more interesting ones like this.
Yeah. I did want to bring up that one specifically because it's not a puzzle game at all, but it's very much part of what I feel like is my identity as a game developer. I love that game. It's hard to pick just one. It's like,
we
yeah.
can pick five. It's fine.
Okay. Yeah, for sure. Um, I oh yeah, here's a good one. So I made this level. This is not a game, but a game development tool I made also for the I Want to Be the Guy fan game community, called J Tool, which stands for Jump Tool, and it's basically a level editor for these I Want to Be the Guy games. So normally you use the Game Maker room editor, but this is a level editor where you can, like, there's always, the character is always jumping and present, so you can like test out your precision platforming live. There's no edit mode versus play mode. It's always in play mode. And so this was sort of a improvement of the previous iteration made by someone called Geezer. That's his username. And this was sort of my improvement. Like, oh, I wish this tool had this feature, and I wish this had this feature. And so I added those, and I improved the interface, stuff like that. And it's not a great tool by my modern standards, but it was a huge learning experience for me in what does it mean to, like, what features do I want to support in this tool and what don't? How configurable do I want this tool to be? In which ways? What is it like to maintain a tool that I have released and found problems with, especially in the file format? But everyone's already created all their files and are using them and enjoying the tool and sharing them with each other. And it's like, oh crap, I better add a version number to these files, huh? That was a big lesson. I also had a big lesson of, oh, I made this really cute file format for these levels, but it's like compressed in this cute way using base 64 and in a weird way. But that makes it a nightmare if you want to make your own parser. If someone else wants to make their tool to parse that, I'm like, oh, sorry. That was a lesson. So if you want to, you can download this tool if you want. It's called JTool, or maybe you can look up YouTube videos if you want. So that was a tool I made. Also, it was in some ways sort of that tool and I Want to Record My Jumps, the predecessor, were sort of the precursor to I Want to Maker, in that, like, oh, hey, this is a lot easier if you don't have Game Maker. You can just open this tool and make your levels. So sort of a little bit of a precursor to that.
How big is this community? I Want to Be the Guy community.
It's hard to judge. I'm also out of touch with it nowadays in recent years. But there are big communities in different parts of Asia, like Japan and especially China. There's lots of people who make and play these games. But there's not a huge amount of intercommunication because of the language barrier. Oh. But we do play each other's games because they're all uploaded to the same website. So
okay.
So it's hard to say. It seems to be smaller than the current Super Mario World Kaizo ROM hack scene is. That's another scene I love. Smaller than that, but still vibrant, I would say, and still full of some designers. I it's inspirational to me what kind of level design people can do here.
I think this segues naturally into I Wanna Maker. So tell everybody what I Wanna Maker is about.
Okay, I Wanna Maker is, what if, so you know Super Mario Maker, and if you don't know Super Mario Maker, it's a game by Nintendo where you can design your own Mario levels from various 2D Mario games and upload them online and share them and play other people's levels. And it's really cool. So what if we had that, but for I Want to Be the Guy fan games? Now, people can already make their own games using Game Maker and using the the project files that are passed around. But what if you can make a really ergonomic, like Mario Maker, you can just, the tools are at your fingertips. And even though there's a limit because you can't write your own code or something, you can, it's like these, you have the, I'm struggling how to explain this. It's a really ergonomic tool that's a lot easier to get into than, for example, Game Maker. Or in the case of Mario Maker, downloading all the ROM hacking tools and making your own ROM hack level. That is a lot of work. So one of our team members, his username is Piece of Cheese. He was the person I think who sort of spearheaded, hey, let's round up together a team and actually do this thing. Like, so he rounded up this guy Clayson, who was one of the core developers. He rounded up me. He rounded up Katie, another username, and later on we rounded up Yo-Yo, another username. Sorry, a lot of username. And over the course of years, we worked on it. And because we have like, hey, you've made a website before. Hey, Patrick, you've made a level editor before in GameMaker. Let's do this thing. And it was a huge learning experience on how to manage such a huge code base, and also realizing, oh my gosh, it's actually a lot of features. Like if you want to make a fully featured level editor, and oh my gosh, we want to have this little custom visual scripting language in there too, which is awesome, but like it's a lot of work. And especially I did most of the UI programming, and like there's having to do lots of UI programming from scratch was a huge learning experience for me. There were lots of learning experiences on that project. We had to figure out moderation. We had to optimize SQL queries, which none of us had that much experience with. It was like, what's an index? Just put indexes everywhere. And I don't know.
SQL queries where? In what way?
Well, all the levels and users and stuff are uploaded to like a SQL SQL relatable, like a relational database. So it's essentially a CRUD app. But we had never written a huge production, CRUD app before, or production in the sense that like it's always running and we can't take it down because people can't play the game then and stuff like that. So that game's development took a long time, but I think we're all very proud of it. And there's a bunch of other people we roped on gradually, like Trilexium, who did all the art. There's so many people that I can't mention them all. But
how many years did it take?
We started I wrote this down, 2016. And then in 2020, around the time of the global pandemic, we released into early access. And from then in 2023, we decided, hey, we're at 1.0. We have all the features. We have a fully fledged single player campaign mode and everything. Now we've released into 1.0.
Okay.
So
Nice.
it was a passion project this whole time. There's no sort of money involved. It's just a free game. And you can play it now. I would recommend this one. I would recommend because there's levels you can play of all difficulty levels. It's I Want a Maker, and you can just play it on Steam.
Yeah. And this was before you started working on a Linelyth or a Linelyth, or how should I pronounce it?
Yeah, I guess I say Linelyth.
Linelyth. Okay.
In retrospect, it's an awkward name for multiple reasons. One of which is it's hard to know how to pronounce it. Also, in retrospect, there's this great puzzle game called Linelyth, which I highly recommend. But it looks that game is spelled very similar to Linelyth, and I shouldn't have chosen Linelyth because it's confusing. Anyways, sorry, I Want a Maker was sort of going in the background for a long time. I started Parabox development in 2018. So about 2 years after we started I Want a Maker, I started Parabox. And so those two projects were ongoing.
Okay. So
then
let's switch. Yeah. Let's talk about Patrick's Parabox then. Your Parabox, to keep the chronological aspect going.
Okay. Yeah, it's interesting to me how the chronological order of when I did what is starting to slip for me even. It's like, oh yeah, I did these two things chronologically. And then Linelyth was sort of the third layer on top of that, simultaneous. Anyways, it's complicated. So Parabox started, I initially made a true prototype in 2014. So I never finished it. And then, so this prototype, which I don't have an image here, was just the basic, hey, there's a big player and a small player, and they can each move around on their own layer. But you can never shrink and grow between the layers. And then for some reason I got distracted. Okay, but then, that was in 2014. And then 4 years later in 2018, so this is like, I just started I Want a Maker, or not just, but I revisited this prototype like, hey, this is actually kind of interesting. And I want to show my friends this. And what if I refactored the code so that instead of just two levels of boxes, like the big player and the small player, there could be a really small player within that, and like so you could actually go in infinitely. And so I programmed that, and then my friends and me both had a really positive response, like, "Whoa, this is such a cool idea with these less nested boxes." And then it just kept running from there. And then Parabox, I spent the next 4 years working on Parabox, but also simultaneously Linelyth and simultaneously other little projects and game jams and stuff.
This was all at the same time.
Well, I guess I say same time, but I was working on Parabox, maybe you consider like part-time hours, like maybe 20 hours per week. And I've oftentimes, and then I Want to Maker some other number of hours per week. And I've always enjoyed bouncing between kind of two main projects a lot of the time, because then if I get stuck on one, I can work on something on the other. And when I come back, I feel refreshed. And then that cycle of refresh goes back between the two. But there's a danger, because what if I never return to one of them? You know, so I've noticed that different people have different balances that's best for them with how many projects they should do at once. But for me, 2 is often a good number, I think.
So you're working both on I Wanna Maker and Patrick's Parabox, and at some point you're gonna start Linelyth while working on those two?
Yeah, that's sort of how it happened. I think so. Here's what happened. Lucas Lislow, who is a great puzzle game designer, or I should say developer, he makes lots of Sokoban games that are really hard and really interesting. He decided to, hey, let's get together a group of 10 puzzle game developers and let's each make a small game and put it on Steam as a bundle. And I was so excited. Lucas asked me, and I was like, this sounds awesome. This is like exactly the kind of collaborative thing I love. Like thinking about I want to try a collab thing. I don't know, this sounds exactly what I'm into, and I would love to be a part of it with this group of talented 10 designers or 10 developers. And so Linelyth was one of those projects, and it ended up being just 9 in the end, and it ended up turning into this. It's called the Cosmos 9 bundle. So you can go to cosmos9bundle.com and check out these games. Yeah, it was a lot of fun to do that. So that was during the tail end of Parabox, and I was like, well, the timing doesn't quite work out because I'm at the tail end of Parabox, but I can't say no. And so, yeah.
So Linelyth was the game that you made for the Coma box?
For the Cosmos 9 bundle, yes.
Okay. Okay. So how much time did you spend on Linelyth then? It couldn't be much because you were like, oh, let's make a game. Where's the deadline? In 1 month.
Yeah, well, the deadline wasn't 1 month. The deadline was, it ended up being around maybe 8 months from when we started to set out to make the bundle. So we were making small games, but we weren't in a super rush. So I think it was about 8 months that I spent on Linelyth, just very much on and off, part-time, so.
How do you do this? How do you keep the mental state? Like, do you keep it somewhere in the back of your brain when you're doing something and then you're switching to a different game? Does it stay there, or you kind of need to get back to it after a week and remember what was happening?
That's a good question. I think if I left a project for a month, then that would, for example, I think that would be really hard to remember. What do I need to work on? What's the biggest problem right now? But I guess I haven't really struggled with that problem you're describing. Maybe because I never spend more than a couple weeks away from a project. I'm also not working on all 3 projects in one day. Every day I'm working on all 3. I think that'd be too much context switching.
So you would have one day dedicated to one project, and after a couple of days, sort of switched, something like that.
Maybe. I wish I had like a video camera monitor showing what I did, because I don't quite remember. But some days I would work on 2 projects. It's what do I want to work on today, and what am I procrastinating on that I should really get around to now? And I don't know. There's some sort of a balance there. Maybe I don't claim this is the best way to work, and also it depends on the person. Some people work better with this Monday is this game, and whatever.
So where would you say you learned puzzle game design?
I think probably like everything, it's just something I picked up over the years. I mentioned earlier that making lots and lots of platformer levels in the I Want to Be the Guy community, that skill majorly transferred over into designing puzzle levels. Because in a precision platformer, there's one solution, which is the intended route. I have to work with the tools I'm given to use them in interesting ways and surprising ways, and also ways that are feel good and very clearly understandable, to make this platformer route through the precision platformer level. As you can imagine, extremely very similar to what you do in making like a Sokoban level, for example. So I've also played a lot of puzzle games. I think that's a big factor. I think just playing and analyzing lots of them so I could realize what I like and don't like and think about how they accomplished what. I think also working with lots of different sets of mechanics, like, I have to learn, like, given a random mechanic, I think I have the skill of, I could come up with a couple levels for that, And that's not, I just having done that so many times, it makes it flow easier. Like, this is similar to this mechanic, so I should try these kind of levels first. So I built up this intuition by working with lots of mechanics, I think. So that's how I would characterize. I learned a lot of level design.
When you said you learned what you like and what you didn't like, to me, like this, especially puzzle game design, is like a mystery. Like I can't wrap my head around how would you conceive of a puzzle, and then like it's just too abstract to style of thinking. So what do you like and what do you don't like about puzzles in general?
It's hard to tell, but I remember there's this nice great talk by Brett Taylor, who made that game Linelyth, which we talked about earlier, that I created a naming conflict with. Sorry. One thing he mentions in his GDC talk, which you can watch online, called Puzzle Game Magic Secrets, is he also had a similar thing. Like, he was playing Steven Sausage Roll and thinking, how does anyone ever come up with these levels? I can barely have enough room in my head to solve these. And it's like, what kind of a genius mastermind does it take? And then when he was creating his puzzle game Linelyth, see, I got him confused. Oh no, sorry. I'm sorry, Brett. When he was making that game, he said he had this revelation of, what if I just I list out all the mechanics in my game and just sort of combine them? Like, what would happen if I combine this with this? What happens if I did this in a new way? And blah, blah, blah. And like, how would I make a puzzle about that? And it turns out you can make a puzzle about that. Using those as like prompts, like, hey, what if listing out the mechanics in my game, pairing them up is a great technique to come up with puzzle ideas. And so it's not like the creator, for example, Steven Sausage Rolls, Stephen Lavelle, was like imagining, I want a puzzle with this deduction and this deduction and this deduction, and it's working out perfectly. And I painted this huge, beautiful masterpiece in my mind, and now all I gotta do is put it into the level editor. It's very much kind of the opposite in a sense. It's like, let's code the mechanics and like see what you can do with them, and then figure out something you can do, and then construct the puzzle around that. So I don't really know how to come up with that core. I just have to observe a lot until I find one, and then the skill is like constructing the scaffolding around that. So in a way, it's like maybe it requires less brain energy, and then I'm just working on like the scaffolding one bit at a piece. Anyways, so it's maybe more approachable if you have that sort of conception that Brett had. Maybe that breaks it down a little bit for you. I'm not sure.
Okay. But then, because you mentioned that you watched some puzzles and you've seen what you like and what you don't like. How would you categorize these things? Like, it's so abstract to me that it's difficult to say like, this puzzle I would like because of X. It's like, it's a puzzle. So it's like, it's unsolved and now it's solved. Like, this is to me like the only two states. And you say like, you like this or you don't like it. So meaning, what would be the puzzle that you don't like? Like, what would be the characteristics of one?
I think this is like, maybe you've played some puzzle games that you like more than others, and I know I certainly have, and I just noticed patterns like, hey, if there's red herrings in puzzle design, in the level design, like, hey, it's really looking like you should go here, but it's actually totally unrelated, and I feel like I wasted my time looking at that the whole time when really the cool thing was over here. I come out with a little bit of a bad feeling, and I can contrast this with puzzles where it feels like, hey, you give me all the information at once, and there's nothing extraneous. It's just more of a satisfying feeling to me. Um, I also have a personal preference to like puzzles where I can make incremental progress. So like, hey, I can make this deduction, and I'm sure about that, and then I can look over here and make this deduction, and now I can sure be sure about that, and I can be sure that I'm not like I haven't messed up at step one. I can be sure that I'm making progress. Some people might not like that. Some people really like maybe having a huge puzzle at once, and it's just totally inscrutable until you have the trick and then you solve it. But I like being guided a little bit and being helped along the way. Like, hey, you probably shouldn't try this. You should be looking at something like this. And because I'm like I'm quite impatient, I think, and I want to. So those kind of observations, I think I make.
Did you figure these out by yourself, by playing other games and designing your games, or also through some sort of discussions, watching videos, reading books?
I wish I had a brain scan machine so I could tell you, but if I had to guess, it's I have watched a lot of game design talks and people talk about puzzle games, and I talk about puzzle games with my friends, and they can tell me what they like and don't like. So I would say it's largely, a huge component of that is talking with other people about it and seeing people's great analysis, of which there are many analyses of puzzle games, like puzzle game talks. But also, I think not just playing puzzle games, but having made a few puzzle games, and then when I played through like Steven's Sausage Roll, for example, or then played through Talos Principle, which I really loved, I can play through it and with a little bit of an analytical brain and be like, oh, Talos Principle often has these little mini puzzles where there's the level, but then the jammer starts out behind one barrier, and it's very easy to get behind that barrier and get the jammer out, and then you can start the puzzle for real. But I kind of like that because it lets you explore the level a little bit before you solve the real puzzle. Not everyone likes that. Some people dislike that. But to me, it's like, aha, I see that they do that. I like that. I'll remember that as a tool in my toolbox next time I'm making a puzzle level. Maybe I can insert that little pre-puzzle into this puzzle I'm making. And so there's just a lot of little tools I've accumulated in the toolbox, many of which I didn't invent. I don't know if I've really invented everything. I'm just synthesizing. I don't think I've invented anything. Just synthesizing from all these sources. I don't really know if that helps, but yeah.
I think it helps. It's interesting. If you were to like recommend other people that would like to learn how to do it, would you say, make games? Would you say watch videos?
I think it depends on your goals. I think there are some great puzzle design videos and GDC talks out there. I think there's no substitute for trying to do it yourself, and then it's not easy to make puzzles. At least I did not find it easy. It's gotten a lot easier over time for me. But to me, there's no substitute for just doing lots and lots of rote practice. And to me, that's the bigger teacher. I would definitely, if I could only choose one, I would do lots and lots of practice rather than listen to these concepts but not know how to apply them. I feel like once I can only know how to apply them once I've been in a situation where I can see how that could be applied. It depends on how you learn.
When you're working on a game and then switching to another game, how much of the puzzle game design is translatable?
Do you mean like the skill of design, or?
Yeah, but also like, do you find yourself in a situation that like, oh, I designed similar puzzle, like with similar mechanic in Patrick's Parabox, and I can reuse it here in a different context? Or is it more on the higher level of abstraction, like you mentioned, Talos principle, having something hidden, like a mini puzzle in the beginning? So this is like a mini puzzle in the beginning would serve as a sort of high order of abstraction, like very abstract thing that you can put, like a meta thing that you can transfer from one game to another. But also like this concrete puzzle that I've seen in Steven Sausage Roll, now I can actually apply this because the mechanic are sort of similar in, let's say, Sokoban.
I think in my experience, I have not designed every kind of game in all or every kind of puzzle. I've never made a crossword puzzle. I've only made like one Sudoku, I think, one variant Sudoku. I've made some action games. So there's some, I think game development as a skill has been hugely transferable. Like, how do I reconcile design problems? Or this game is not fun. What do I do about that? And so that to me is like half the battle, besides this whole like puzzle level design thing. Those skills are just transferable across project management. But to answer your question more specifically, I really do think of it like there's a ton of tools in my toolbox, and like which tools do I have a lot of experience with? If I'm really experienced with that tool, then I will reach for that one really quickly. Like, oh, I can make this kind of level. And I think it'd be cool to have a huge list of those tools enumerated. So one list of tools that is enumerated is I have this sort of list that this list of puzzle game idea strategies. Sorry, it's puzzle level idea strategies, and we can link this in the video description. It's a list that I accumulated partly from my own experiences, but a lot of them from other puzzle designers. And it's just a list of like 30 or so brainstorming techniques for how to come up with new levels. Like, what if you had a level where it makes you feel claustrophobic? Or what if you had a level that only has 2 tiles wide? Or what if you had a level that you pick 2 random mechanics in your game and make a level about that? There's lots of brainstorming techniques you can have, and that's one kind of tool. Other kind of tools are like, hey, can I force you to do A before B? No matter what the puzzle mechanics are, there is some kind of can I make a sequencing puzzle, like where the trick is to figure out what order to do things with. That is just one thing I should try eventually if I'm making a puzzle game. Like, can I do a sequencing? Or what if I have one object that's normally really restricted, but it's in a really free setting this time? Or what if I have an object that's normally really powerful, but I try to make it really constrained? Just there's lots of little tools and things to try. And for me, it's kind of fun to imagine, like, if I'm making a level, oftentimes I'm looking at the level editor, and it's like, okay, there's no magic involved. There's just some way to put objects in the right spots so that it's an interesting level. It's not like I have to come up with some beautiful English prose to write this beautiful novel. It's like, it's very, it's not like I'm injecting ideas into the game. It's me, searching and discovering what's there. And that's sometimes takes a while to find something, but those tools are extremely transferable between projects. And sometimes a tool that works on one won't work very well on the other. Like, oh, this game is not spatial at all. Like, there's no spatial component, so I can't use any of my spatial techniques. Darn, because there's so many of those. But you know what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. I asked this a lot. Tell me, how do you judge a puzzle difficulty? How can you judge?
I can't judge. I let playtesters judge. I think in some ways that's my real answer. In some ways, of course, I try to judge my puzzle's difficulty as best as I can. I don't rely solely on external checking. I think it's also important for me to judge the difficulty of a puzzle in context. Like, what in this area of the game, in this area of 15 puzzles, are people spending about the amount of time I want them to spend? Or are they like kind of getting bored and want to move on? And I should, make some puzzles optional so they can move on quicker. Or maybe these areas too easy and they're not really understanding what's going on. And they're like, oh, I wish there was more, kind of a feeling. Then maybe I've tuned it too much the other way. So aside from just one specific level, I think there's the layers to look at there. And also being consistent across the game is important. Like, hey, this two puzzles might be very great individually, but like if one's a super easy one and one's a super hard one, it's like, well, that's kind of jarring to play as a player, because what is the design language of the overall game? If I'm shifting tone all the time, it's like not great to read that book or something. So I've definitely found that I improve on the skill of judging difficulty, and also especially judging how well mechanics are explained via level design. Because as the game developer, obviously I'm extremely familiar with the mechanics. I've probably even programmed them, so I know all the edge cases. So it's difficult for me to clear my mind and imagine what it's like to learn these things, and what misconceptions I'll have, and what misconceptions need to be cleared up, what things need to be clarified, what expectations can I play on and subvert. Like, oh, you thought it worked this way, but actually, blah, 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 you know, that's difficult, and I need people who have actual fresh minds on that. But I've definitely improved the skill over time significantly, where I can, clear my mind in it, at least a bit.
You mentioned also something about like the pacing and structure. Like, how would you lay out the puzzles in a game? Is there some sort of golden formula that you follow? For example, like offering people more than one way of doing. Like, if you're stuck on this one, you go somewhere else. Like, what is your go-to way of doing the spacing? Like, is there some sort of golden rule how much people should spend stuck on the puzzle? And if there's, stuck for more than 5 minutes, then like in 2025, it means they will drop the game, and like that's it.
I think it depends on what your goals are. I think I'm often thinking about, I don't want people to drop the game because I want them to see the end. I want you to see all this cool stuff. I don't know what it's like about, I have a target audience in mind, and it's people maybe that has similar tastes in puzzle games to me. And I'm not trying to think about, hey, I want to target this audience. I have myself as my target audience, really. So that helps. It also depends on, like, some people have different tastes. Like there's this one example, there's this game called The Golem, which is a Sokoban game. You can buy it on Steam. It's a very good game. It's very interesting. And it has this quote, which is, to think about a difficult problem is a beautiful thing. And I might be getting that quote wrong, but those puzzles are very hard. And the quote is kind of saying you shouldn't feel bad about not solving these, because it's interesting to think about these problems. And even if you didn't fully solve them, I don't make those kind of games. I want people to sort of make incremental progress through the game. Like, I want to have a lot of easy puzzles. And so that's my goals. And in terms of how to actually lay this out, I think I always just copy some other game. Like, for example, well, I don't know. The reason that I was hugely inspired by Steven's Sausage Roll in multiple ways, but one of which was at the beginning of making Parabox. Which way should I take these mechanics? Should it be like an action puzzle game where there's timing and you have to have to solve the puzzle before it fully zooms in? Or maybe it should be a totally abstract puzzle game. Or maybe it should be like a themed, like a heist themed puzzle game, which is the original idea, where you're sneaking around in boxes to infiltrate this facility. But then Steven Sausage Roll showed me, oh, I can just make it an abstract puzzle game with just the mechanics. And so I just copied that in a sense. And in Parabox, it just copies the formula of, hey, let's have puzzles on the core path and then optional puzzles that are on the side. And that's it. And there's some great advantages to that, because like you said, players aren't often getting bottlenecked. They have multiple places they can make progress. And it also, more importantly, caters to players on both ends of the skill spectrum of the skill spectrum that I am targeting. Players who can barely make it through the core puzzles, they can still make it through. But players who find them really easy, but really want the hardest puzzles, they can also do those. And these first players can just skip them, and that's a huge advantage. That, for example, the linear format of puzzle games, like Portal and Portal 2, for example, do not get this benefit whatsoever. whatsoever. But they get different benefits, like they have a interconnected world and a excellently written story and all this stuff. But that is not a route that most people can execute on. And I certainly, whenever I think about linear puzzle games, I think danger zone. It's a danger zone immediately. There's also other ones like, hey, do you want to have an open world like The Witness or something? Or I wrote down this other one about, there's like, what if you had a really interconnected world where all the puzzles are present on the overworld, but then there's like puzzles in between them, like A Monster's Expedition does this, or other games do this too, where there's individual Sokoban puzzles, but then sometimes the puzzles interact. Like, hey, if I take this item from this one and this one from this one, it actually lets me get a secret. And it's this really cool meta layer. And it also has non-linearity where there's the core path and the secrets are the hard path. So I think looking at reference for how other games do it is, there's lots. I think that's something I can definitely get from other games, is about the structure. I think it's hard to maybe invent a new structure, but there's lots of different examples out there. That's my long answer to that.
Nice. When you talk about these like hardcore, hard, difficult games, like puzzle games, you talk as if you're talking about like an art thing, like a something to aspire to, kind of. Do I get this correctly? Like this feeling of, like, you mentioned the game Golem, it was like as if it's like, like this sort of pinnacle of something.
Oh, I wouldn't. The Golem is very much not to my taste. I appreciate it, but it's I especially appreciate watching a Let's Play of that game because I can actually see all the levels in it. But it's very, very different than Parabox, where in Parabox it's very much catered to my taste, which is I'm impatient. I really like easy puzzles that are interesting, and I like to be guided and shown things. And I'm really especially happy with how much I iterated on the level design and the difficulty progression in that game through lots and lots of playtesting, because other people can now really have such a smooth experience with that game, and I'm really proud of that. So that to me is that's my goal. That's my pinnacle. That's what I shoot for, is that kind of thing. I would advise, like, I would recommend this path. I would say this is a great goal to shoot for if you want to, but you might not want to shoot for it. You might want to have hard puzzles, and that's fine. But it is very neat to see how unexpectedly this really gave Parabox a broad audience that could, of like more casual puzzle players, could really get into this game and be like, wow, this is so much easier than Baba Is You, is like mentioned in a lot of Steam reviews. And no shade to Baba Is You, it's just a different game, and made with different tastes. And so I would love to play more easy puzzle games that are still interesting, is my preference.
Okay. What would you say about The Witness and this, both the difficulty of the puzzle, but also like this open world format of it?
The difficulty in the open world format. I love The Witness. I think it's my favorite game. Well, The Witness has a very high level artistic goals, and I often, when I'm making games, really think about the nitty gritty. What's the difficulty of this puzzle? What's the flow like? But I think in The Witness, it has loftier goals than that, and so it's a little bit reductive, I would say, to analyze The Witness in this way. But I do analyze The Witness in this way because I make when I'm making a game like Parabox, I don't have any lofty goals. I'm really focused on the nitty gritty craft of the puzzles, and so it's useful for me to analyze. I love the artistic half, the side of The Witness. I really do. But I can still analyze sort of the pure puzzle game part of it. So in a sort of a mechanistic sense, I would, to answer your question, yeah, the Witness, the open worlds of The Witness gives lots of benefits. There's, locality of different topics, that you get a break between puzzles as you walk between them and look at this beautiful world. it allows you to do just like cool things with situating puzzles. Like, hey, these puzzles are in this temple and it's for a thematic reason. And hey, these puzzles are in you build a bridge using these puzzles in 3D. And like there's just so many. The game is so huge. And as for the difficulty, I was really inspired by how many little puzzles in a row the Witness has. And you can see that reflected in Parabox. There's lots of puzzles in a row in like a topic sequence. Like I bet you could take a screenshot of like some level rows in Parabox and then pair that with some level panel rows in the Witness and be like, wow, those look, there's like 6 in there and 6 in there. And like direct huge, that was one of the tools that I took from the Witness. I use this tool all the time. It's like split up puzzles into multiple sequences, into a sequence of puzzles rather than just one puzzle, and let the ideas build on each other. I think that's one of the huge strengths of the Witness, just mechanistically, the puzzles, is that it's so cool to see this ideas build, and then here's a twist, and then or here's a reinforcement, and like here's another one. It's like here's the conclusion panel. It's like you get so many benefits out of that rather than just having like here's 2 puzzles that are hard but cool, and that's it. You know, it's so even if, for example, if for example I were making the Witness, which I was not by a long shot, I would maybe tune the puzzles easier because that's my preference. Like you can see my preferences very clearly if you play Parabox. That's my preferred difficulty level. So I would tune a lot of the puzzles in the Witness easier, but and cut some puzzles or make some new puzzles or whatever my personal preferences are. But I do really like the sequencing aspect of the difficulty, or the flow of the game. Does that touch on all the aspects of your question?
Yeah. I mean, I also asked about the open worldedness, which is a different way of doing this, definitely, than like Patrick's Parabox or like Baba's. Is kind of like, you know, you kind of here's a line.
Yeah. I wish I had a big list of puzzle games, but I think there's a lot of different ways to do it. There's like linear, like Portal. There's like core path with optional puzzles, which like maybe Baba Is You or many puzzle games do this. There's like open world like Witness with like different areas. There's also like a Bonfire Peaks method where Bonfire Peaks, it's sort of linear with optional puzzles, but you have lots of choice within the individual areas. There's like, it's just like, hey, solve any 3 out of these 6 puzzles. And there's no indication of difficulty. Like, or like, you know, there's no intended order is what I'm trying to say. So it's sort of open world within the little areas, but then there's optional pockets, you know. So it's just, and there's lots and lots of variants on this. I think that format is really excellent for Bonfire Peaks, for example, where there is no clear, here's the mechanic introduction. You can discover the mechanic in any of these 6, you know, and they're all equally good. Or like some might click with different people. So I would say, look, there's lots of games that are referenced that do the puzzle, like they do slightly different formats for what the puzzle game should be. And oftentimes it's best when that format synchronizes with the game mechanic. Like, hey, these 2 mechanics are actually quite independent from each other. It doesn't matter which you encounter first. It's not like this one is the more basic version of this one. So let's make them, you can do either one in either order. And that is very synchronous with how what the mechanics actually are, if that makes sense. As opposed to arbitrarily choosing, you do this one, then you do this one. And it feels kind of weird. Like, hey, that's not really a totally accurate way of presenting this system and showcasing this system to the player. Anyways, does that help?
You mentioned that you found level design in the platformer similar to puzzle design. Does it also translate to other genres? Or have you tried designing a different kind of game in a more like strategy fashion, or even like action stuff? Like that does it make sense to draw parallels from between more wide range of genres?
That's a good question. I guess I haven't made too many, like especially big projects that are not within my wheelhouse. I have made lots of little game jams here and there, and kind of like the couple board games I've made at game jams, things definitely applied. I was like, hey, we want this system and this system, and hey, we're making a spatial 8x8 grid board game. Hey, I know some mechanics that I've seen in other board games that are spatial, and or so I've definitely found my specialization a little bit with like, puzzle games and platformers and things like that. So um I'm not a huge I'm not a variety streamer or something like. I'm not the equivalent of a variety streamer for games. I have my favorites.
So why do you think you like them, the puzzle games and platformers?
I wish I'd be. I don't know. I'm not a psychologist, so I guess I don't quite know. But there's probably something about I played a lot of puzzle games as a kid or something, and played a lot of platformers as a kid, especially Super Mario World, and I just have always gravitated toward them, and especially playing lots of Flash games in the Newgrounds days. I played lots and lots of puzzle platformers and puzzle games on Newgrounds, and especially really got into the ones which have level editors. I would go crazy with those and make lots of levels and lots of games. And yeah, I really just got into it that way. Um, I don't, for example, enjoy puzzle games because, oh, I'm so smart, therefore I enjoy puzzle games. No, it's just like, I don't know. I don't know why people enjoy anything. It's just I enjoy puzzles. Yeah.
Okay. So before this discussion, I asked in our Discord server, are there any questions to Patrick? And people submitted a couple of them, and one of them was asking about a particular moment. Was there a particular moment in your career that sort of defined something for you? Like you made some sort of a leap in terms of your ability to design stuff. I know that you've done like, you don't give yourself enough credit. You made like shit ton of games, like shit ton, and you're like, oh, I designed a couple of them here. Like you made a massive number. So is there, from your like vast experience, a moment where you could point to, it's like, oh, this really made me a better designer for this type of game or something like that?
I thought about this question, although I'm really proud of how many games I've made, but I also made them over the course of about 14 years. So they are kind of spread evenly across that. But I think that Derek Yu quote about treating finishing games as a skill that I mentioned earlier, that was really influential to me. There's not any particular individual moments, although I did note down this one moment where toward the end of Parabox development, I had realized, wow, I've gotten a lot better at puzzle level design over the course of the 3 years of making this game. And I really had. And making that game made me a lot better, I think. Just there's this there's like about 364, I think, puzzles in Parabox. And then there's also about 600 puzzles that are just in the drafts folder that did not ship. So I just had lots of, trial and error and iteration there. So that project in particular taught me a lot. I wish there was a particular insight that I could convey, but it's just been a lot of small insights over years. Good luck. I don't know. Sorry.
Hashtag work hard. No shortcuts. Nice. So let's talk about you joining Thekla and working on Sokoban. Tell me what was the experience. Or first, tell me what was the onboarding. Because like famously, Jonathan Blow made his own language to work on this game. So if you're close to the language, then I guess you need to learn the language as well, which is not like maybe easy because it's not publicly available, so there's not many resources. So how was the onboarding at Thekla?
I did say earlier that I think of myself largely as a programmer, but my role at Thekla is not a programmer. It's like level designer. And so I can't speak much to the onboarding for that. It was also convenient that I've used the Thekla programming language, Jai, for a couple years, just in the beta before that, making my own puzzle game prototypes. So whenever I need to do programming on the game, like to add an editor tool or fix a bug or something, it's very convenient that I can just jump in and be like, oh, right, that's how memory management works here, and blah, blah, blah. Here's the temporary allocator, very nice, and da, da, da. In terms of like level design onboarding, so how it happened was before starting work at Thekla, I was invited to playtest the game. And so I did a playtest of the game over some months where I recorded videos of myself playing and commenting out loud my thoughts as I was playing. And this is the kind of format that I personally really appreciate. And that's like the must-have format when other people are playtesting my games. I need to hear them think through their thought process and see how many seconds they get confused on different parts and what are they getting confused on. And so because there's so many nuances kind of going on there, and especially seeing how many minutes they spent on different chunks of the game is like, oh, you spent much more longer on this than this. And I expected the opposite. Like, huh. So I did that process for the Thekla game. And during that process, I really enjoyed the game. And then sometime after that, I'll skip over some details here. When I was invited to start working on the game. And so when I started working on the game, it was very convenient that I had just played the entire game and it was somewhat fresh in my mind. Otherwise, it would have been very overwhelming. So it was overwhelming to me to get accustomed to, okay, what is it like to actually edit this game and work on it? In terms of not only the editor tools, which are good, but it takes some getting used to, but also switching my role from a player and a feedback giver to like, okay, how do I actually maybe fix this problem that I brought up? Like, oh, actually, it's not so simple how to fix that problem. And like, oh, that problem occurs here and here and here. It's like, and realizing, learning the style guide of the game about, okay, I recognize the level design style that's here, but it's hard to actually make levels in that style, or it didn't become obvious to me. Now I think I make levels within the style and edit levels to be within the style.
A style guide for the design. I mean, by the way, I don't think you need to be worried about like. So I talked to Jonathan. I talked to Rafael Luba as well. I think like if we say something that Jonathan would like be taken down, we'll do that. So like I think we can speak quite freely. I think he's okay with you sharing some of the stuff behind the scenes.
Oh, okay. Sure. I guess, I haven't spoken to John previously to this podcast, so. But yeah, I watched both John and also part of Raphael's episode on this podcast. Yeah. So there is no written style guide. Sorry, when I say style guide, I just mean like the mental style guide that's implicit in looking at all the levels. There's no written style guide.
That's a skill, by the way. Like to be a designer that can infer a style guide from the puzzles and then adapt it. Like this is so abstract to me, you can't even imagine. Like this is like a level of abstractions working upwards, like 4 levels from the base that I'm operating in. Like this is inferring the stuff from the puzzles there. It's so wild.
Oh, well, I'm flattered. But there's also there's some maybe abstract things in the style guide that are kind of how you describe, but there's also some very rote things like, hey, you can imagine, like, let's imagine you have a Sokoban level. And now imagine 10 versions of it that have sort of different spacing or like different orientations. Like one's rotated 90 degrees and one has really thick walls to be clear. And then one is like the same puzzle, but with an extra box. And then one is the same puzzle, but, even just like a horizontally flipped makes it feel a little bit different. Or one is the same puzzle, but the player starts out in a different location. Or one is the same puzzle, but it is the ultra simplified version, which has it's like a square room like imagine it's like a level in Parabox where I love these levels where it's like just a square room with there's a few objects in it and that's it, you know. But you can also imagine a version where there's lots of little jaggedy walls added that add some interest to how you navigate the level. Anyways, you can imagine all those sort of parameters, and those parameters are very understandable. Like, hey, I could imagine you just tweak this parameter, and they're very like simple to understand. Like, oh, the game in this situation, the game always has 3 tiles of space, you know, even when you only need 2. And it's like, oh, that's very simple to recognize when it's wrong and to apply it and make it consistent. And oh, the game always gives a focal point to what this constraint is. So when there's this kind of constraint for how many water tiles I can teleport across or something, the game always tries to be consistent of, let's not make any other gaps that look like you could almost cross them to make that be the focal point obstacle. And so I think there are a huge number of these things, and it's easy to miss one. And when the one is missed, you know, another designer will point it out, like, hey, we missed that here. Like, oh, you're right. So those are more easy. I think there are some more abstract ones, like what is a puzzle? Like should we have this puzzle in the game or not? Like, is this interaction good enough or not? Those are the more high level questions about. They're very subjective. They're extremely subjective, and I think it's also another fortunate part of when I had playtested the game, so it's fresh in my mind. But I also happened to really resonate with the level design there and be like, oh, I really agree with most of these principles here, even if this level is harder than I would have made it, for example. You know, but that's just my personal preference. And so that's also fortunate that there wasn't, you know, John has been a big influence on me in terms of design. And so it makes sense that I wouldn't have a huge amount of friction in terms of design, kind of getting accustomed to contributing to the game. So there's the onboarding. Right? Do you have anything you want to latch on there?
Okay. How do you then like find what to work on apart from the stuff that you brought up and like seen during the play testing? You probably need, like, this is a massive game, so you probably, like, wherever you go from the overworld, there is stuff to be done, right? Is there some way of keeping track of like what's done, what's you know, under development in terms of like more puzzles, maybe cutting some puzzles out and stuff like that?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think knowing what is most important to be done is also a skill I've developed over making, you know, dozens and dozens of games before. So it's helpful to apply that. Like, oh, we need to do this in order for the game to be functional, even though we really want to do this other thing that's sort of, it's like it improves the aesthetics a lot. It's like maybe we should do the first thing first in terms of order of operations about what do we get the most iteration time on. Like some things maybe need more drafts, like, hey, let's try this out and then see how it feels. And then let's try this out. And then let's try a merge of the two or something like that. And that requires, for example, maybe 3 cycles of work. And so we better prioritize doing the first cycle of work so that we don't have to cram in all 3 cycles of work and maybe we miss the last one before the game has to be done. So it's things like that. And also order of operations about, well, we need to figure out this constraint or this some kind of a global aspect, because this affects other aspects of the game. This affects how the visual art should be, or this affects how we organize the levels. And so we better kind of do that first rather than like procrastinating and then having to make weird decisions that need to get overturned. So those are all sort of normal game development things. I think in terms of this specific project, John is very much the project lead. There are other leads, like for example, he doesn't do, you know, John is not an environment artist. So there are multiple environment artists working on the game. And they are also the people, like other people than him have also determined the visual style of the game and art direction. And John, of course, has a huge amount of thoughts and contributions and control over that and all this stuff, you know. But the point I was trying to make is for my work, there's just, I don't exactly determine what, you know, I work on. I can't just do anything like I can on my own games because I'm working in a team. And also more importantly than that, I'm not like, there's a hierarchy of structure, which makes sense. You know, we can't have everyone making, you know, decisions all the time, because there's, you know, various reasons for that. But especially in this company, John is sort of the, you know, auteur of the game studio, and so sort of most all things need to be run through him, and that includes, hey, what do I decide to work on? Because I might say, hey, I could suggest, hey, I really think I should work on this part of the game next to improve it. Or hey, I need to work on this in order to pass off these levels to the environment artists. We need to finalize them. But John is ultimately the one that says, hey, that sounds good to work on, Patrick. Go ahead, and then I'll give you feedback on it. Or John might say, hey, can you work on this next, Patrick? Because we need to finalize this. So even though I might disagree about what's the most important thing, and I might have, if I were like the creative director for this game, I would definitely make different decisions. But, you know, so would everyone. You know, everyone making their own game would make their own decisions. And I think John's decisions are, you know, quite good, or they're, at least I'm into them, about what creative decisions have been made for this game. Even if, you know, I would have done it differently, you know, it just would have ended up different. And I'm not sure if it would have ended up better or worse, or it's been a little bit interesting to me reconciling, you know, for the most part, there's no huge problems of like John telling me what to work on next and be like, oh, I hate that part. It's not really like that. At least, I mean, there's parts of game development that are drudge work for every discipline involved, you know, and I'm no stranger to doing drudge work in any project, but there's never been too many like huge creative differences where I'm like miserable working on something that I hate. I don't know why I brought up that last point. I guess it's just saying, hey, that's great. That's great. You know, that's great that I like the game that I'm contributing to. So does that help? That answers your question about prioritization?
Yeah. Yeah, and also like I had the question that you already answered. If you want to add something, you can add to it. But I wanted to ask, like, how is it different when you were running your game, right? And you were like, I am the creative director and alpha and omega here. Like I do what I think needs to be done. For example, Patrick's Parabox. And then how is it different to join Jonathan Blow, that you like from a lot from the design of his games, but also like now you're not in this like director shoes, right? And you need to I also always imagine like the group of designers at Thekla fighting over very subjective decisions, because it's so like design is so subjective, you know. You can like in programming world you can always say like, okay, let's pick the fastest code, for example, like if it, like that would be like the way to settle an argument. And like whether to remove a level or not, it's, to me it's like such a wild take. And you have so many levels to decide, like whether to remove them or not, like to keep them in or add some. I can't imagine this.
Welcome to making art. I don't know. Art is subjective, and I love making art. I think just to maybe like this kind of subjectiveness is not limited to the design discipline of game development. It's also there in visual art and sound and music and writing. You know, I don't do most of those things professionally, but you know, programming also has subjective parts to it, obviously, you know, and some of them are like even feedback a little bit to the art. Like, how do I want to structure my code base to allow for which kind of design implementation, you know, or sorry, which kind of design experimentation is what I meant to say. Like, which kind of experimentation do I want to allow for, you know, in terms of how much time I'm spending programming it. Yeah. So anyways, I would say programming is not immune, at least if you think about it in terms of we're making art. I think part of me liking making games is that I get to decide what I'm making, and I get to realize a vision that's in my head. And so I'm not always worried all the time about, oh, what's the right thing to do? Oh no, there's no obvious decision here. It's more like, hey, sometimes it's not obvious how to best realize this vision in my head, but that's a problem I enjoy solving. It's like problem solving. And So that's just even if I'm working alone. It's like, you know, it's not that the fact that other people coming to the mix is what causes the problems. That's making creative art is not just a straightforward process. At least I have to learn how to do skills and learn how to make the best decisions and fix my mistakes and stuff. I think in terms of Thekla now, it's not like all the team does all day is spend arguing with each other. So it's not, I don't know why there's a picture in your head about arguing, but for example, the environment artists, the environment art team, just sort of the art team in general, they are doing a fantastic job, and I work with them to kind of work with them I'm like sort of help to bridge the gap between the level design and the environment art. Like, hey, let's work on these specific. How should this be? Just fixing problems with individual levels so that it's better to do environment art for them. Things like that. And there's a lot of subjectivity there.
Meaning, like,
I guess the point I'm trying to make is maybe there's not anything special, I would say, about the design of the game versus any other aspects. I mean, I really like the design of the game, but it's not like it's a problem never faced before in video game development or something on this game. It's just like any other, there's design problems and we have to figure out the best way to execute on the artistic vision and stuff like that. Does that address it a little bit?
Yeah. Now when you mentioned this, I realized that, like, in these levels, you sort of have this grid that, it can also be like in 3 dimensions, like the height can be different, right? But this means that environmental art can like make or break the level, right? You need to be able to see what you want to see, and mechanics need to be communicated pretty well so that you know what you can do within a level. So for me, it was like sort of you do the design and then you can like send an email even to somebody and they will do the environment art. But this is not the case, right? You need much more communication between the 2 departments.
So yeah, earlier I said there was no style guide for the level design, but I think there has been before my time at this company, there has been a lot of iteration to hone in on exactly the art style of the game, but also how to solve these exact grid alignment problems, how to do the contrast between the foreground and the gameplay elements in the background, what exactly techniques work there, adding an outline shader to the gameplay objects, which might be contentious on like X comments.
Oh yeah, this is like a
things.
top X comment. The outlines.
Yeah, I mean, this is not in my purview at all, but that's a decision that has been made to help this overall picture. So besides just adding environment art to the level, there's also like, what is the level design itself? Is the level viewable from one camera angle? Or are there walls that obscure elements that are behind it? If so, then maybe you should redesign the level so that it's viewable from one camera angle. And that's like separate from the environment artist's job. That's sort of the level designer's job about how do I think in level design, at least for this game, thinking visually about camera angle and stuff is a part of the level design. And so I would say that it's very like, I view it holistically. It's like a problem, or it's a thing that has to be addressed from every step. It's like, first of all, these the gameplay objects were presumably designed and modeled and textured and everything and iterated on to be very clearly readable and distinct from all the other gameplay objects. And like, that's a piece of the picture too. And so I view it as not just, hey, we have to make sure the environment art is not a problem, but everything else has also, in the whole pipeline, has been ensured to not be a problem too. So I love the environment art in this game. It's a real pleasure for me to work with such talented environment artists on this project. They're amazing and great to work with. And certainly they put a lot of effort into individual levels, like, hey, how do we make the grid readable in this level geometry that is not quite a real building over here, but maybe let's make it look like a building. Or hey, we have like this quarry area, and like we have to make it look like a quarry, but in a really contrived Sokoban level. And they accomplish that. And it's like they have so many tricks that they're able to deploy to do that. And it's just visually well composed, and it's amazing to see that work done. But I think to address your question, it's like that is not the only step in the process, or to make a level readable. It's not like it's their job to make the level readable. Hopefully the level is readable before they even do environment. That's what I'm trying to say.
Okay, nice. Then what is out there for you on your roadmap? Because you are now working on Sokoban, but also you mentioned that at the past, at least, you've had like 3 other projects struggling. So do you have other projects that you're working on now, or this is your full Sokoban takes up your full attention now?
So I am jumping. So the Sokoban project at Thekla is my main focus, and I currently work there sort of part-time hours, about I think 20 to 25 hours per week. And then my secondary focus is I'm currently making lots of little prototypes and doing game jams. So no big project currently. Although I am sort of working on this Sokoban roguelike game with randomly generated levels and powers. And that has been the longest term project I've worked on, although it's still unclear to me whether it can turn into a commercial game or not. So that's my biggest project. But I'm still sort of shopping around prototypes, hoping to make another commercial game of unknown size. I think I would love to make another game of the size of Linelyth, where it's like an hour or 2 or less of playtime, but it's just this really short, sweet experience about this puzzle mechanic. I'm on the lookout for a mechanic like that if I discover one. I'm starting to get the itch of wanting to dig into a project like Parabox or Linelyth again. Although I'm still loving, improving my craft and doing game jams and making stuff for fun. And also Sokoban, the Thekla game being my main, I'm finding that quite fulfilling to work on. And hopefully when that game releases, I will be very proud. I mean, I'm sure I'm already proud of the work I've done on that game, but I think it'll feel great when that game releases too.
I know I won't be able to get an answer from you for the release date, so I'm not gonna even ask. But that's a shame, but all right.
I think you could ask John about that, maybe.
Yeah, he could say like sometime around like, in 2 years, or like something like very unspecific. And
yeah, I think every project I've worked on, I've never been able to pinpoint a specific date, unless I have a deadline. Then I can actually say, oh, it's the deadline. And then lo and behold, the deadline is real, and then it actually comes out on that day. So
that means like, usually for the better. It turns out for the better in terms of the game quality, right? Like you don't want to set a deadline, like a release date in like a couple of weeks, and then we didn't do this, we didn't do that. Just at some point you probably need to ship, but if you can extend this, it's better for the quality, I guess.
Yeah, I think it depends on the situation. Deadlines have also been a very positive force for me at different times. So, like, otherwise I would have meandered on the game and never finished it, for example, if there hadn't been a deadline. Or, hey, it's a deadline to show a demo about Parabox at a certain event, or to submit to Parabox to the IGF, so I better have all the levels in order. Those have been an extremely positive force, and otherwise I would have moved slowly. So it depends on the situation. I am not the project manager at Thekla, not even close. So that's mostly John's department. So yeah.
All right, Patrick, thank you so much. This was an awesome discussion. Do you have any closing thoughts on any of the subjects that we mentioned?
This was great chatting. I can't believe it's already been how long it's been. Time flies.
Almost 2 hours, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. I'm really glad I got to mention I want to try a collab, and I just love creative exercises like that and riffing on ideas. And I think that's definitely related. Like finding delight there in unexpected things is definitely related to what I love about making puzzle games nowadays. There's like it's like I found something delightful and I want to show it to you so you can have that delight too. And I'm really trying to nowadays incorporate more of that spirit into my artistic practice, about surprise and delight. And hope that my positivity and enthusiasm about making games came across.
Nice. Awesome. Thank you so much, Patrick. This was a really nice discussion.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.